When a racist cop drenched a black girl in acid, he thought nobody would care, especially not in a town built on silence and chemical smoke. But Aliel's agony ignited a storm that no badge or bribe could stop. Her father rose, not just for vengeance, but to drag every accomplice, corrupt police, dirty politicians, and the CEO of a ruthless chemical company, into the light of a federal courtroom. This time, the monsters pay. Think injustice can hide forever in America? Think again. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. And stay tuned, this ending will leave even the heartless begging for mercy. In the dying light of an autumn afternoon, Briarwood Estates looked nothing like the name. Rows of squat houses, paint peeling, fences bowed, huddled under the shadow of an aging chemical plant. The air hung thick, stained yellow by smokestacks, heavy with the copper taste of something industrial. For the black families here, the world had always been gray. Gray skies, gray futures, gray justice. Ariel Johnson rolled home along a cracked sidewalk, the low hum of her wheelchair barely audible over the factory's hiss and clang. At just 20, she moved with the practiced caution of someone twice her age, each motion precise, careful, as if life itself might slip away if she dared to rush. "Even in Ariel?" called Mrs. Baines, clutching a rag to her mouth as she watered the dusty remnants of a once lush garden. Her eyes lingered on Ariel's bandaged arms, then flitted away. Across the street, old Mr. Carter hacked into his handkerchief. Another day marked by another unexplained cough. Ariel nodded, trying to summon a smile. Her skin burned under the film of dust, her breath shallow from 12 hours spent sorting chemicals inside the plant. The foreman's words echoed in her mind. "You people should be grateful for work. Don't complain about a little air." She'd swallowed her protest, like every other day. Waiting for her by the leaning porch was Bailey Johnson. He stood tall, shoulders squared by habit, not by hope. Once a civil rights attorney, now just another black father, with a daughter in a wheelchair and a heart heavy with debts, both moral and medical. Bailey's eyes tracked every shudder of Ariel's hands on her wheels. "Rough shift?" he asked quietly. Ariel tried to laugh. "Nothing new. The vent broke again. They said it's not a priority." Bailey's jaw tightened. He'd heard it before. From the plant manager, from the city council, even from the judge. The last time he'd tried to sue the factory for negligence. "Not a priority, Mr. Johnson. These cases rarely go anywhere." Ariel glanced at him, reading the tension in his brow. "Dad, don't," she whispered. "We can't fight everyone. Not now." Before Bailey could answer, a distant siren cut through the quiet. A police cruiser crept down the block, tires crunching on gravel. Officer Darren Lively was at the wheel, sunglasses on despite the fading sun, his white knuckles tapping the door. 3 other officers lounged inside, laughing at something on a phone. The car slowed as it reached Ariel. Lively rolled down his window, gaze flicking from her face to her chair, then to Bailey's dark suit. "Well, well. Evening, Johnson?" Lively sneered, voice syrupy. "Out late again? Hope you're not getting into trouble." One of the younger cops leaned over, a smirk plastered on his face. "Careful out here. Factory's not responsible for what happens after dark. Ain't that right, Mr. Johnson?" Bailey stared back, unblinking, but Ariel's eyes flashed. She gripped her wheels tighter. "We're just going home," she said, voice steady but shaking with fury. "Is there a problem, officer?" Lively's smile thinned. "You let us know if there is, sweetheart. Wouldn't want any," he glanced at the others, "unfortunate accidents. Not your fault you people get into trouble, huh?" A pause. Then, like a script they'd practiced, all 4 officers laughed. The car rolled on, windows up, leaving a trail of exhaust and something colder behind. Ariel's jaw trembled, but her gaze never dropped. "They look at us like we're already guilty," she said, half to herself. Bailey watched the taillights disappear. "That's the point," he said softly. "Make us feel small enough, we'll stay quiet." Down the street, a neighbor's door closed. Quiet, careful, the lock turning fast. Nobody wanted to be a witness. Nobody wanted to be next. Inside their house, Ariel pulled herself onto the worn couch. Bailey set the kettle on the stove, his hands shaking. For a long moment, silence sat between them. Finally, Ariel spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You ever get tired, Dad, of fighting?" Bailey looked at her, seeing all the years he'd poured into letters, calls, marches, each one ending the same way. "Some days," he admitted. "But then I remember who's watching." Ariel looked away, eyes glistening. Outside, the factory lights blinked on, painting the sky a sickly orange. From somewhere down the block, the sound of coughing carried through the open window, a reminder that the poison didn't just come from the smokestacks. In the suffocating hush, Ariel's anger smoldered. No one stepped up. No one called out the police. The neighborhood watched through curtained windows, praying the trouble would pass them by. But tonight, the tension had a different edge, a pressure building, silent and deadly, waiting for the smallest spark to turn into a blaze. The unspoken war between the black community and the system simmered beneath every interaction, every breath, growing, festering, just waiting to explode. By dawn, a thin gray mist curled above Briarwood, carrying with it the acrid scent of solvents from the old chemical plant. Every breath felt like swallowing a secret that no one outside this zip code would ever taste. Life here moved in half steps. Eyes always over the shoulder, hearts wary, words measured to avoid giving offense to the wrong man in the wrong uniform. A day after her first clash with Officer Lively, Ariel wheeled herself along the narrow alley that snaked between the looming fence of the plant and the row of battered homes. The path, once a shortcut for children on their way to school, was now pocked with potholes and stained with runoff. Bottles, gloves, odd scraps of warning tape, trash the city never seemed to pick up. Ahead, a handful of tired black men in faded work shirts trudged home, their hands nicked and skin discolored by another shift in the vats. Someone called softly, "Stay safe, Ariel." It was Jerome, his voice frayed with fatigue, and the soft desperation of a man who'd buried too many complaints. She smiled, a flicker, there and gone, then kept her eyes forward. Suddenly, the low growl of a police cruiser cut through the stillness. Officer Darren Lively, with his perpetual sneer and sharp blue eyes, rolled down the window as he blocked the path. His partner, a younger officer with the fresh look of someone not yet deadened by years on the force, flicked his tongue over his teeth, eager to watch and learn. Lively's voice echoed, too loud in the tight alley. "Well, if it isn't our little celebrity. What's in the bag, Ariel? Chemicals for another accident?" Ariel stopped, the front wheels of her chair a breath from a deep rut. She lifted her chin, defiance kindling behind her fatigue. "Just my lunchbox and some paperwork. Officer, do you want to search my grocery receipts too?" The partner snickered. Lively stepped out, boots squelching in an oily puddle, and stalked toward her, hands on his belt, badge glinting. He loomed over her, every movement calculated to make her smaller. "Show me," he demanded, snapping his fingers at her backpack like she was a child. Ariel unzipped the bag, the motion shaky but dignified. Inside, sandwich wrappers, an empty thermos, a few printed shift laws. Lively rummaged through, scattering her things in the mud, not bothering to hide his contempt. He found nothing, of course. He leaned down, close enough for her to smell stale coffee and a hint of whiskey. "You people always have something to hide, don't you?" he said, eyes narrowing. Ariel met his gaze, steady and unbroken. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong place, officer. Or maybe you're just afraid of what you'll see if you look in the mirror." The silence bristled. Lively's jaw twitched. The partner's eyes went wide, but he said nothing. The workmen watched from a safe distance, their faces rigid masks of non-involvement. One of them, Samuel, clenched his fists but didn't move. Another slipped quietly behind a dumpster. Lively's patience snapped. He gripped the handles of Ariel's chair and yanked it sideways, nearly toppling her into the gutter. "You want to get smart with me?" he hissed. "Don't test me, Johnson! I can make your life a lot harder." Ariel righted herself, fury coursing through her, breath shallow but steady. "You can't break me," she whispered, so only he could hear. "You can try, but you can't." Lively straightened, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. "If I see you mouthing off again, if you so much as breathe the wrong way, don't expect any help from this department, or your neighbors. Maybe next time your chair tips over and nobody sees a thing." He kicked the backpack farther into the gutter and strode back to his car, partner trailing behind, glancing back once with something like pity, or was it fear? The cruiser peeled away, sending up a spray of dirty water. The alley was silent, but for the slow drip from a broken pipe. Ariel's hands shook as she gathered her belongings. Jerome finally approached, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, girl. You know how it is." Ariel didn't look up. "Yeah, I know exactly how it is." For a moment, the old code of silence reigned. Everyone saw, nobody saw, life goes on. But as Ariel pushed herself up from the muck, something in her posture changed. The humiliation was old, but this time the injustice bit deeper, cut closer to the bone. Every time she saw those faces, polite indifference, averted eyes, the trembling hands of men who'd learned the hard way that speaking up could cost them everything, her anger built. She paused at the corner, wiping oil from her palms, and looked back at the cluster of workers. They looked away. No one dared meet her eyes. That night, as the wind pushed the plant's fumes deeper into the neighborhood, Ariel lay awake, replaying the scene. Leedy's sneer, the partner's silence, the crowd's withdrawal. She remembered her father's words, the old warnings about pride and survival, but tonight they felt like relics from another time. No more silence, no more swallowing rage. The injustice Aurelie endured on that polluted road became a line she could never uncross. Her anger no longer something she could put away. In that moment she knew something was coming, and she would not be the one to back down. And then the worst truly arrived. The night air pressed in, heavy and cold, fogging the weak security lights behind the plant, where the concrete gleamed slick with rain. The chemical stench was sharper than ever. One breath and you'd swear your lungs would burn. Ariel knew every pothole, every dark corner along the alley behind the factory, because shortcuts meant less time in the open, less risk of running into trouble. But some trouble, she learned, is patience. It was near midnight. The whole block was silent but for the steady drizzle and the distant thrum of machinery that never really stopped. Ariel's hands were raw from a double shift, her mind still replaying Officer Lively's threats from days before. Each turn of the wheel echoed with a warning. But home was just around the next corner, and the last shift of fear never quite outweighed the desperate pull of sleep. A single headlight flickered in the darkness, too low, too slow for a regular car. Then the unmistakable blue flash of a police cruiser. Rolling to a halt, engine idling like a beast. Ariel froze. She heard the door open, then footsteps, slow, deliberate, splashing through puddles behind her. "Out late, aren't you?" Lively's voice sliced through the night, slick with mock concern. He stepped under the weak halo of light, face twisted in a half-smile, the other half pure hunger for power. Ariel's pulse hammered. "I'm just going home," she answered, keeping her voice steady. Her fingers tightened on the wheels, ready to roll forward, but he blocked her path, boots planted in the mud. The alley seemed to narrow, the walls closing in. Lively looked her up and down, gaze lingering on her battered wheelchair, the factory badge clipped to her coat, her tired, defiant eyes. "You got a lot of attitude lately, Johnson. Not smart in this neighborhood. You think you're special because you know a few words? You think your crippled act gets you sympathy?" She stared him down, lips pressed tight, refusing to feed his cruelty with fear. He took out his phone, flicked the camera on, and spoke loudly, his words meant for more than just Ariel. "We got ourselves a little lawbreaker here, folks. Guess they'll let anyone roll around after hours these days." He panned the camera over her face, then closer, too close, as if trying to erase her dignity. Ariel's voice came out cold, sharpened by exhaustion and rage. "You can record all you want. Doesn't change who you are." Lively smirked, but his eyes burned. "That's where you're wrong. In this town, I am the law." He reached into the cruiser and pulled out a battered metal canister. The faded label read, "Industrial use only." Ariel barely had time to process it. A split second, then, the sharp chemical tang hit her before the pain. Lively upended the canister, dousing her with viscous, burning acid that hissed as it ate through fabric, flesh, and metal alike. Ariel screamed, a raw animal sound, her hands flailing for anything to stop the agony. The acid chewed through her sleeve, splattered her face and legs. Her wheelchair's frame sizzled, plastic melting into the concrete. She tried to twist away, but Lively held her there, forcing the lens closer. Her pleas echoed through the alley. "Help! Somebody! Please! Help me!" Her cries ricocheted off the factory wall, but not a single window opened, not a door unlocked. In the glow of Lively's phone, her skin bubbled and blistered, pain lancing through every nerve. Lively laughed, voice oily and triumphant. "Go ahead, Johnson. Scream louder. Maybe the rats will come help you." He pressed the record button, then looked straight into the camera, eyes flat and merciless. "This is what happens when you people forget your place. Try and sue, see what good it does you." Rain pelted harder, washing trails of acid into puddles that hissed and spat. Ariel's sobs faded to low whimpers as the pain grew overwhelming. Lively's laughter faded with him as he got back into his cruiser, phone in hand, leaving her burning, broken, and alone. No one came out. No neighbor risked stepping into the alley. The only witness was a security camera, red light blinking in the drizzle, recording the entire scene in cold, silent clarity. Minutes later, Lively's video began to spread online. "Black girl gets what she deserves," the caption sneered, hashtags dripping with venom. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Shared, dissected, debated, but never denied. Some recoiled in horror, others joked, argued, or blamed Ariel for being in the wrong place. But pain needs no audience. Ariel lay curled on the wet cement, acid still eating at her skin, rain mingling with blood and chemicals. The world kept spinning, indifferent, but a line had been crossed, too deep and too violent to fade. Bailey's phone buzzed that night, a neighbor's trembling voice, then a siren, then a scream he'd never forget. In that instant, grief and fury twisted into something far beyond endurance. The old rules, the quiet, the patience, they were finished. There would be no more silence. For Bailey Johnson, that night split his life in two, before the scream and after. The call from the hospital had not included details, just frantic instructions. "Your daughter, Ariel, come at once." But nothing could have prepared him for the chaos that greeted him at the ER entrance. Blue lights flickered off wet pavement. The waiting room was ringed with uniforms. Officer Lively, front and center, his shirt immaculate, voice calm as he answered a white nurse's questions. Inside, Ariel was a silhouette behind frosted glass, a cluster of doctors and nurses working in silence. Bailey tried to push through, but a burly cop blocked his way. "Sir, you'll need to wait here. There's an active investigation." Bailey's voice broke. "That's my child in there. I need to see her. I need—" "Protocol, sir." The cop's tone was flat. "For your safety and hers." "Safety?" Bailey looked around and saw nothing but menace officers flanking the entrance, hands on belts, eyes hard. He recognized the routine. Keep the black family outside, let the authorities write the story. The attending physician, a white man in his 50s, clean-shaven, expression blank as an invoice, finally emerged. "Mr. Johnson?" Bailey stepped forward, heart pounding. The doctor kept his voice professional, bordering on mechanical. "Your daughter suffered severe chemical burns. We're doing everything we can, but the prognosis is grave. She may not make it through the night." Bailey staggered. He pressed his fist to his mouth to keep from crying out. "I want to see her! Please! I'm her father!" "I understand, but right now we can't allow anyone in. She's in critical condition, and given the circumstances, law enforcement has advised we restrict access." Officer Lively approached, hands folded before him, his face the very image of official concern. "We're all sorry for your loss, Mr. Johnson, but you should know, your daughter was very agitated when we found her. She resisted medical aid, tried to strike out. Standard procedure is to secure the scene and protect staff." The audacity was stunning, but Lively delivered every word with the honeyed, practiced sympathy of someone who'd been here before. He made Ariel sound dangerous, unstable, a perpetrator, not a victim. Bailey could barely breathe. He turned to the nearest nurse, a black woman with tired eyes who, for one brief second, let her hand rest on his shoulder. Her look was a message. "I know, I see you," but her words were careful. "We're doing all we can, sir." From down the hall, Bailey caught the tail end of a conversation between two officers. "Must have done something to deserve it. Why else would she be out there in the middle of the night? You know how they are," the other muttered. The rage that had simmered all his life, through every closed door, not a priority. Every time he'd taught Ariel to keep her head down and her answers short, ignited. Bailey pounded on the glass, shouting his daughter's name, shouting for anyone to listen. He begged, he threatened, he demanded to see a lawyer, and demanded to speak with the hospital director. The nurses backed away. The security guard radioed for backup. Lively stepped in closer. "Mr. Johnson, I need you to calm down. You're disrupting a police investigation. If you can't cooperate, I'll have to ask you to leave, or take you into custody." "Go ahead and arrest me," Bailey roared, his fists slamming against the wall. "Go ahead. You want to silence all of us, don't you? That's what you do." Two officers grabbed his arms. The nurse tried to intervene, whispering, "Don't let them take you. She needs you." Bailey let his body go limp, refusing to give them a reason for violence. But the humiliation, the helplessness, it was acid of its own kind, burning deeper than any wound. As they walked him out, the white doctor stopped him for a moment, voice almost gentle. "We'll call you if her condition changes." Bailey stared at him, seeing only the outline of a system that had failed his daughter from the moment she was born. He stumbled outside, the cold slicing through his jacket, the night wind stinging the corners of his eyes. Ariel's pain was his own, multiplied by 1,000 sleepless nights of hoping the world would change before it broke her completely. Tonight, something inside him snapped. If justice would not come to his daughter, he would bring justice to those who had stolen her life. He stood beneath the hospital's washed-out lights, fists clenched, watching Lively return to his car. The cop's eyes met his for a moment, just long enough for Bailey to read the warning, "Stay in your place." But Bailey's grief had burned away fear. In its place was a cold, pure fury. There, in the shivering dark, Bailey vowed he would not let Ariel's scream go unanswered. He would drag every shadow into the light, no matter the cost. And so, while the world slept and the city tried to move on, Bailey Johnson began to dig for the truth behind his daughter's attack, setting into motion a fight that would shake every pillar of power in their broken town. In the gray light of early morning, Bailey Johnson found himself beneath the harsh glare of fluorescent bulbs, seated in a cramped office that smelled of stale coffee and resignation. The police station had always seemed impenetrable. Walls lined with faded community awards, old newspaper clippings about neighborhood heroes, and a photo of the mayor, shaking hands with smiling officers. But behind the civility there was always something harder, something closed. Bailey clutched his folder with shaking hands, the hospital report, his own sworn statement, grainy photos of Ariel's burns. Each sheet felt like a weapon, but as he sat across from Chief Mallory, the city's top cop, he realized he had brought paper to a gunfight. Chief Mallory was a relic of another era. Broad, silver-haired, his tie knotted tight enough to choke the truth. He didn't offer a seat or a coffee, just a bland smile that never reached his eyes. On either side of the room, Officer Lively sat stiff, his lawyer close, and a representative from the chemical plant, a woman with an icy gaze and a clipboard balanced on her lap. Bailey slid the complaint across the desk. "This is an official grievance against Officer Darren Lively for attempted murder. My daughter, Ariel Johnson, was the victim." Chief Mallory studied the document, lips pursed. "We're aware of the incident. Internal Affairs is already conducting a review, Mr. Johnson. There's no need for duplicate paperwork." "I demand an outside investigation," Bailey pressed, his voice tight but controlled. "You know exactly what happened out there. There are witnesses, and you have security footage." Lively's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit, raised his hand as if silencing a child. "With all due respect, Mr. Johnson, Officer Lively was responding to a possible trespass. Ms. Johnson was found in a restricted area after dark." She resisted questioning. "My client resisted questioning." Bailey's voice cracked. "She was in a wheelchair, coming home from her shift at the plant. You think that justifies what happened to her?" The chemical plant rep interjected smoothly. "Our records show Ms. Johnson left her shift at 7:12 p.m. The incident occurred closer to 11. That alley is not an approved thoroughfare. We can't be responsible for individuals who put themselves at risk." Bailey glared at her. She had every right to take the fastest way home. "Your factory's toxic runoff made the sidewalk unlivable. Don't pretend you care about safety now." The chief cleared his throat. "This isn't a courtroom, Mr. Johnson. Let's keep our tempers in check." But Bailey saw it then. The way the lawyer and the plant rep avoided each other's eyes. The way Lively's jaw clenched but never broke character. There was a script, and everyone here knew their lines. Every sentence, every unfortunate incident, every promise of a fair investigation was just the blue wall holding. He tried again. "There are cameras on that back alley. I want the footage released. Publicly." Chief Mallory folded his hands, eyes flat as concrete. "That footage is evidence in an ongoing investigation. It cannot be released at this time. If you have additional concerns, you can submit them in writing, but I assure you we're taking this matter seriously." Bailey's frustration boiled over. "Taking it seriously? You've already started rewriting the story. My daughter is fighting for her life and you're worried about protocol." Lively finally spoke, voice cold, rehearsed. "With all due respect, Mr. Johnson, your daughter was hostile. She struck me with her chair. That's all I'm prepared to say on advice of counsel." The lawyer added smoothly. "Officer Lively has served this community for over a decade. He's received commendations. He has no history of misconduct. We trust the process." The chemical plant rep cut in again. "And, for the record, Ms. Johnson's employment file shows a written warning from last year. Something about a safety violation. Of course we support all our employees. But responsibility goes both ways." Bailey's hands shook as he stood, voice icy with fury. "You're all covering for each other. I see it now. The plant poisons us, the cops brutalize us, and you call it procedure. My daughter is not a statistic. She will not be swept under your carpet." Chief Mallory rose, buttoning his jacket. "That's enough, Mr. Johnson. If you continue making baseless accusations, we'll have to ask you to leave. This department stands by its officers. The facts will come out." But as Bailey turned to go, a file caught his eye on the chief's desk. His daughter's old accident report, the one from the factory floor. He recognized the signature, but the details were all wrong. The description had changed, from malfunctioning equipment to employee error. A subtle switch, but enough to erase liability. He turned back, eyes blazing. You changed her file. You covered for the plant before, and you're doing it again now. The chief didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled with chilling politeness. You have a nice day, Mr. Johnson. We'll be in touch. Bailey walked out, the doors closing behind him with a finality that rang in his bones. He stood for a moment on the steps, rage and helplessness a knot in his chest. The blue wall was higher than he'd ever feared, and it wasn't built for people like him to climb. But as the wind picked up and the sirens sang in the distance, Bailey understood. Every wall has a weakness, every secret leaves a trace. He would not let them bury his daughter. Not this time. Refusing to surrender to their barricades, Bailey resolved to seek out new allies. Someone, somewhere, who would help him break through the silence and expose the truth behind Ariel's suffering. The wind swept chill and restless down Briarwood's streets that night, rattling loose siding and setting old porch swings creaking. In the church basement, its paint flaking, its lights a little too harsh, neighbors gathered in the kind of uneasy silence that only visits a place where everyone has something to lose. The folding chairs scraped across the scarred linoleum as people settled in, their voices a low murmur of worry and caution. Outside, patrol lights flickered, a silent threat, waiting in the darkness. Bailey entered, shoulders hunched under the weight of recent days, his presence drawing quiet attention and sidelong glances. He scanned the faces, men and women whose hands bore the stains of the plant, whose backs had bent under its labor. There were young mothers clutching toddlers, elders wrapped in thin coats, and at the edge of the room, a handful of white faces, some tense, others bored, all careful. The town's pastor, Reverend Ellis, stood by the battered podium, his Bible pressed against his chest like a shield. Bailey stepped forward, voice carrying the crackle of pain and pride. We all know why we're here. My daughter, Ariel, is lying in a hospital bed tonight because of what happened behind that factory. Some of you saw the video. Some of you heard the screams. This isn't just about my family. This is about all of us. What kind of future we want for our children. What kind of people we are willing to become. A hush fell, punctuated by the distant thrum of a police cruiser passing outside. Someone coughed. Mrs. Carter, gray-haired and usually fierce, shifted in her seat. Bailey, honey, we all feel for you, but you know how things are here. Ain't nobody gonna risk their job at the plant for a fight they can't win. Rent doesn't pay itself. Bailey's frustration surfaced, raw and honest. That's just it. They're counting on us to stay scared, to keep our heads down, let them poison our water, beat our kids, and call it an accident. If we don't speak now, when will we? A young man, Deshaun, whose older brother had been accidentally beaten by police years before, lifted his chin. And you think we hadn't tried? Last time anybody spoke out, he lost his house. They'll fire you. They'll evict you. My mama says keep quiet and pray. A white woman near the door, clearly uncomfortable, offered a brittle smile. Look, the police protect us too. It's just, maybe this is all blown out of proportion. There's always more to these stories. A rumble of resentment rippled through the crowd. Bailey turned to Reverend Ellis, who stood solemn and silent. Reverend, your son marched for civil rights. You taught us to do right, not just for ourselves, but for the next generation. What do we do now? The pastor's voice was soft, weighted with sorrow. I have buried too many sons, Bailey. I've seen what speaking truth costs, but silence eats at a soul just the same. From the corner, a man in a work uniform shifted uneasily, I heard the company's handing out bonuses to keep people happy. If you sign an NDA, you get an extra month's pay. They want this to go away. Most folks'll take the money and move on." An older woman whispered, "I got a letter. No return address. Said if I caused trouble for the police or the plant, I'd regret it. My grandbaby's just started school. I can't risk it." The tension in the room was a living thing, thickening the air. Bailey's heart thudded not just from anger, but from the realization that every injustice was underwritten by this fear of hunger, of eviction, of violence that didn't come from strangers, but from neighbors, bosses, friends with secrets to keep. At the back of the hall, a young man rose and spat out, "Bailey, you're just drawing heat on all of us. Nobody told your girl to take that shortcut. Some people need to learn their place." Bailey's hands balled into fists, but he forced himself to speak evenly. "Nobody gets to decide who's safe and who isn't. Not here, not anymore." Ariel wasn't looking for trouble. She was just trying to get home, like any one of you. Someone hissed from the shadows. "Maybe if you'd kept quiet, this would have blown over." He looked around, meeting every eye he could, desperate to break through the wall of apathy and self-preservation. "You think if we're quiet enough, careful enough, they'll leave us be? History says otherwise. We owe our kids more than silence." A sudden commotion at the door. A young boy handed Bailey a torn envelope, eyes wide with fear. Inside was a slip of paper. "Back off or your family's next." The room fell even quieter, whispers rippling as the threat was passed hand to hand. Bailey raised his voice one last time, pain warring with resolve. "I can't do this alone, but I can't stop either. If we want justice, we have to stand together. Otherwise, they'll keep picking us off, one by one, until there's nothing left to fight for." Reverend Ellis stepped forward, resting a hand on Bailey's shoulder. "Courage is contagious, son, but so is fear. I pray you find the ones who remember the difference." As the meeting broke up, people filtered out in uneasy silence, some avoiding Bailey's gaze, others muttering half-formed apologies. In the parking lot, a few lingered long enough to squeeze his hand or offer a quiet "God bless," but most melted into the shadows, eyes wary, hearts heavy. Bailey knew what he was up against now. Not just the blue wall, not just the plant, but a community so battered by decades of betrayal that hope itself had become dangerous. Determined not to let fear win, Bailey began reaching out one by one, seeking those who had witnessed Ariel's attack, searching for a single courageous soul willing to risk everything for the truth. Some nights in Briarwood, hope felt as fragile as breath on a window. After the meeting dissolved into suspicion and shadows, Bailey knew the only way forward was to find someone who could tip the scales. Every whisper from the community pointed to one name: Emily Chen, a bright-eyed college sophomore who, by sheer twist of fate, had been near the back lot of the chemical plant the night Ariel was attacked. The college dormitory felt like another world. Bright posters on the walls, the hum of music and distant laughter, the song air happy, lifted, one pieless child, silent, the illusion of ordinary life. Bailey's knock on Emily's door was gentle, almost apologetic, as if he feared breaking the spell. Emily opened, nervously smoothing her hair, eyes darting down the hallway. "Mr. Johnson, my mom said you might come." Her voice trembled. In the cramped space behind her, textbooks and scattered notes on environmental policy competed for room with family photos. One, unmistakably, her mother in a plant supervisor's uniform. Bailey took in the room, noting the careful neatness, the anxious energy. "Emily, I won't take much of your time. I know you were near the plant that night. I need to know what you saw." Emily's mouth worked silently. I saw someone. I heard screaming. I saw a flashlight. It was quick. I didn't want to get involved." Her eyes pleaded for understanding. From the next room a door banged. Emily's mother, Mrs. Chen, appeared, her face set in lines of worry and exhaustion. "Bailey, "I'm sorry, but Emily has exams, and she's not getting mixed up in something that isn't her fault." The police already asked. She told them what she knew. Bailey kept his voice low, gentle but insistent. "Ma'am, your daughter may have seen something that could help clear Ariel's name and hold the people responsible. Without her, the case could be buried." Mrs. Chin's reply was clipped. "My husband and I work at that plant. We have to think about our family. You know what happens to people who cross the company. Emily needs her education. She can't afford distractions." Emily stared at the floor, twisting her hands together. Bailey leaned forward, the weight of his own fear lending him a kind of fierce clarity. "Sometimes you don't get to choose if you're involved. They made you a part of this when they attacked Ariel in front of you. All I'm asking is for the truth." Tears sprang to Emily's eyes. "I'm scared, Mr. Johnson. Last night someone called. They said if I talked to anyone, I'd lose my scholarship, or worse. How did they even get my number?" Mrs. Chen's voice wavered, breaking through her resolve. "We can't protect you if this gets bigger, Emily. There are things you don't understand about how this town works." Bailey tried one last time. "What's left if we all keep quiet? Who will protect us then?" He searched Emily's face, searching for the spark of courage he'd seen in so many young people before. But the pressure of years, the generational memory of what happened to those who spoke out, was heavy in the air. The phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. Emily's hand shook as she pressed ignore, her face pale. Finally, she shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson. I want to help, but I can't. I'm so sorry." He closed his eyes for a moment, nodding. "You don't have to apologize. I understand more than you know. I wish it didn't have to be this way." Mrs. Chen squeezed Emily's shoulder, then turned to Bailey, her own eyes wet with unshed tears. "You should go. Please, just let us be." Bailey rose, defeated, the hope that had led him here flickering out. As he stepped into the hallway, the hum of dorm life continued, 1,000 small futures ticking forward, untouched by the violence visited upon his own. For a moment he pressed his fist to his mouth, willing himself not to scream. He had known it would be hard. He hadn't realized just how alone he truly was. Yet as he made his way back through the midnight campus, phone buzzing with another anonymous threat, a low voice called from the shadows outside the maintenance building. "Mr. Johnson," the man whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong place for help. Some folks at the plant remember what real justice looks like. Maybe it's time you talk to the ones who keep the machines running, not the ones who own them." Bailey turned, curiosity flickering in the darkness. The night wasn't finished with him yet. Guided by this unexpected hint, Bailey steeled himself for another kind of fight, one that would take him deeper into the heart of the plant, and into the secrets that only those at the bottom of the ladder were willing to risk for truth. The darkness that blanketed Briarwood before dawn was not just a trick of the weather, but the weight of secrets heavy in the air. Bailey followed the directions left by the anonymous janitor, footsteps echoing along the deserted lot behind the chemical plant. The old storage shed squatted in the gloom, rusted, forgotten, a grave for things the company wished would never see daylight. He hesitated at the warped wooden door, heart pounding with dread and defiance. It was a place only men like Marcus ventured after midnight, men who knew the plant's guts, who had patched its leaks and risked their health for a weekly wage and the chance to go home upright. Tonight, the risk was different. Tonight, the darkness was alive with watching eyes. Inside, the thin slice of light from Bailey's phone swept over broken shelving, oil stains, and the familiar figure of Marcus, hunched in a corner, shoulders hunched tight, eyes wild with anxiety. "Close the door, quietly," Marcus whispered, glancing over Bailey's shoulder, as if expecting the walls themselves to listen. He pressed a trembling hand into his pocket and produced a small USB drive. "It's all here. Security cam footage, the real one, not what they handed to the cops." And something else, paperwork from the storeroom logs, shows how the acid left inventory. Your girl wasn't the first they tried to bury. Bailey took the drive, fingers numb. How did you get this? Marcus shook his head, sweat beading on his brow. Let's just say, I've been working nights too long to not see what they don't want seen. You think the plant bosses care about us? They sign for things in the middle of the night. And people like me clean up the mess. A noise outside, the crunch of gravel, the faint thud of car doors. Bailey and Marcus froze. Through a dirty window, two figures materialized under the orange wash of a distant street lamp. Faces shadowed, moving with the wary purpose of men on a job. Marcus whispered, "They sent someone. I knew it. I knew it wasn't just paranoia." His hands shook as he tried to force a laugh. Should have burned that footage. Bailey pocketed the USB, voice low. "Not yet. We get out of here. You hear me?" The footsteps drew closer. The men outside murmured, checking their phones, casting quick glances at the shed. Marcus edged toward a stack of crates, mouthing silent prayers. Bailey moved with him, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon, a crowbar, a shard of glass, anything. A sudden slam, a boot against the shed door. One of the men outside barked, "Hey, this is private property! Come out now and nobody gets hurt." Bailey gripped Marcus's shoulder, heart hammering. "Back! Over there! Out the window! Now!" With practiced desperation, Marcus eased up the window sash, the frame squealing in protest. Bailey ducked through first, boots hitting the frozen ground hard, then turned to help Marcus, who fumbled the USB in his panic. It nearly slipped into the grass, but Bailey snatched it just as a flashlight beam swept overhead. "Stop! Police!" The voice was familiar. Officer Lively's partner, the same young cop who'd watched Ariely suffer with silent compliance. Behind him, a second figure, a plainclothes man Bailey didn't recognize, brandished a baton, advancing. Bailey yanked Marcus forward, both men stumbling through a thicket of weeds. The pursuers crashed behind them, cursing, swinging lights in wild arcs. For a split second, it felt as if the entire neighborhood held its breath, a black father and a battered custodian running for their lives through the backlots of a town that never wanted their truth. They darted into the shadows between two garbage bins, breath ragged. The police lights flashed, but their pursuers hesitated, unwilling to chase farther into the maze of detritus and broken fences. In that silent pause, Marcus wheezed, "You get that footage to someone real, Mr. Johnson. Don't trust anybody from here. Not even me if it comes down to it. They find out I helped you." He couldn't finish. Bailey, heart still pounding, gripped Marcus's hand hard. "You did the right thing. It's not over yet. Not by a long shot." As the men in pursuit gave up and the sounds of engines faded, Bailey and Marcus waited in the cold, hearts hammering, sweat freezing to their backs. When the night finally went still, Bailey slipped away, clutching the USB as if it were Ariel's last hope. Hours later, in the first anemic light of morning, Bailey plugged the drive into his battered laptop. The screen flickered, then showed the grainy video. Officer Lively in uniform, unlocking the storeroom, wheeling out the acid drum, glancing up as if to check for witnesses. Time-stamped, undeniable. Damning. Next, a set of logs. Dates, signatures, requests from the police department for special inventory. The evidence was a noose tightening, not just around Lively, but around the necks of everyone who had conspired to keep Ariel's agony hidden. But as Bailey stared at the screen, hope and terror warred inside him. This was the truth, finally, in the palm of his hand. Yet truth was fragile, easily lost, easily destroyed by the same hands that had battered his family. If he didn't act, the secret would die in the dark, like so many before. With the video in his grasp and danger stalking every step, Bailey knew the next move would have to be bold. He would have to bring the evidence into the light, before the forces of power and silence could bury it for good. With the damning video clutched in his hands, Bailey felt for the first time that justice might finally be within reach. But in Briarwood, and across much of America, truth is often just the beginning of a new kind of war. The moment he made his first call to an attorney outside the county, the first whispers of resistance appeared, subtle as mold on old walls. A concerned citizen on the local radio wondering aloud about the Johnson family's history, an anonymous email to a local blogger describing Bailey as unstable and out for a payday, a sudden flurry of social media posts seeding doubt, disbelief, and outright lies. By noon, the story had become a fever. One TV anchor, lips pursed with manufactured concern, told viewers, "There are new allegations this morning in the Johnson acid case. Rumors are swirling about the victim's background and her family's motives." A rival channel ran a segment featuring Officer Lively in a crisp suit, hands folded, his voice honeyed with just the right tremor. "This has been so hard on my wife and me," he said, looking straight into the camera. "All I ever tried to do was protect this community. I would never hurt a soul. I hope people will remember my record and not these wild stories." The city's biggest newspaper ran an editorial under the headline, "A Tragedy, but Questions Remain," opining that the rush to judgment could hurt the reputations of good officers and honest companies. And then the internet truly woke up. Hashtags twisted Ariel's name into a joke. Hundreds of accounts, some clearly fakes, others neighbors who'd never spoken to her, insinuated that she'd staged the attack for attention, that Bailey had orchestrated everything to shake down the city, that maybe this was all just what happens when certain people don't respect the law. Photographs from Bailey's own college days were dug up, old debts, a traffic ticket, a distant cousin's arrest record, each twisted into a narrative of generational trouble, as if trauma and pain ran in black bloodlines by birthright. At the hospital, Ariel's room was bombarded with calls, some laced with threats, some with slurs so old and venomous Bailey felt the weight of 100 years pressing down on his chest. Former friends from the neighborhood stopped returning calls. Bailey's church, once a haven, now sat half-empty, parishioners offering awkward glances or muttered apologies as he walked by. Even his employer called to remind him of company policy on outside political activity. Ariel, pale and trembling, scrolled through the posts on her battered phone, her face unreadable. "It's like I don't exist anymore," she whispered. "Just their version of me." Bailey knelt beside her, voice hoarse. "They want you to feel that way, baby. That's how they win." A knock at the hospital door interrupted them, a nurse delivering another stack of hate mail, eyes averted as she slipped out. One note, scrawled in red, read, "Fake cripple, rot in hell." Another, sent via text, threatened, "Tell the truth, or next time we finish the job." On TV, Lively's story spread, polished and tragic. He cried on cue. His lawyer called for calm and unity. At the same time, an independent expert from the chemical plant went on the air to explain that these substances are strictly controlled, hinting that Ariel must have smuggled something out herself. Bailey's voice grew raw with each denial, each new lie. He sent the video to local outlets, but most refused to run it, citing ongoing investigations or insufficient verification. A few that did received immediate threats of legal action. His inbox filled with rejections, boilerplate responses, or most chillingly, silence. Despair lapped at the edges of Bailey's mind, heavier than any grief he'd known. The smear campaign was total, a wall of noise and doubt designed to suffocate hope before it could breathe. But then, in the quiet of Ariel's hospital room, Bailey's phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Mr. Johnson, my name is Jade Thomas. I'm an independent journalist, and I've seen what they're doing to you. If you want to fight back with the real story, call me. I'm not afraid of the truth. In the space between one breath and the next, Bailey felt a flicker of resolve return. If the world wanted war, he was ready. As the city's lies grew louder, Bailey found his first real ally, a voice willing to lift the veil. Together, they would prepare to bring the real story out of the shadows no matter the cost. The hour was late. The world outside long since surrendered to sleep. But in the back corner of a battered cafe near the tracks, a small rebellion was brewing. Bailey arrived with the weight of a city's suspicion on his shoulders. Ariel's fate etched deep in every line of his face. A single light flickered above the booth, casting Jade Thomas, her eyes keen behind thick glasses, her notepad and recorder always within reach. In a haze of purpose and exhaustion, Bailey hesitated before sliding into the booth. He was used to strangers offering help that vanished the moment things got real. But Jade's first words cut through the doubt. "They want you to feel alone. You aren't." She pushed her phone forward, the screen playing raw, unedited footage of Officer Lively wheeling out the canister, his expression casual, his movements chilling in their routine. "I've traced supply logs, checked maintenance rosters, spoken with ex-workers. This isn't just an accident. This is a system. And you're not the first." He studied her face. Too young, too weary for her age, but every word rang with the conviction of someone who'd chosen truth over safety. Before he could answer, the bell above the door chimed. It poured a group of local students, 3 black, 2 white, kids with fire in their eyes and the bruised idealism of a new generation. They clustered around the table, defiant in their solidarity, passing phones and whispers. "We want to help," said a young man with a battered backpack. "This isn't just about Ariel, it's about all of us. If we stay quiet, we're next." The group bristled with nervous courage. One girl pulled up hashtags, "Justice for Ariel," "Truth is Power," already trending. Another had printed flyers. The room buzzed with a hope Bailey had almost forgotten, one born not of naivety, but of resolve sharpened by disappointment. Jade leaned in, lowering her voice. "I'll go live tonight. I have a secure channel, watched by people who don't trust the networks. We can get the footage out before anyone buries it. But once we do, there's no going back." The sense of history, in the making, was electric, but so was the sense of threat. The door crashed open. Officer Lively entered, flanked by his young partner, jaw clenched, badge glinting like a dare. The cafe's meager clientele shrank into the walls. He strode up to the table, gaze cold. "Evening, folks. Late for a meeting, isn't it? Hope nobody's planning to incite anything dangerous." His eyes fell on Jade's recorder, then on Bailey. "You're making a mistake, you know that, right?" Jade didn't blink. "You're scared because you know what's coming. The truth doesn't care about your badge." Lively's mouth twisted, worry flashing. "Careful, Miss Thomas. A lot can happen to people who stick their noses where they don't belong. Same goes for your little friends here. Wouldn't want a misunderstanding." One of the students, a girl with braids and a steady voice, stood up. "We're not afraid of you. We know our rights." The threat in the air was palpable. Lively stepped closer, trying to stare them down. The partner shifted nervously, glancing at the door. "Let's go, Darren," he muttered, but Lively ignored him. Bailey rose, voice hard as steel. "You've spent your whole life hiding behind that uniform. You can't silence all of us. Not tonight." For a long moment it seemed violence might break out, but the young people closed ranks. Phones recording, hands steady. Lively scanned the faces. So many eyes, so much resolve. And for the first time, his bravado faltered. Jade, never taking her eyes off Lively, pressed Go Live. In seconds, the screen filled with viewers. The footage rolled. Lively, the acid, the logs, the raw truth no press conference could contain. Outside, sirens began to wail as the news raced ahead of any cover-up. Online, outrage exploded. Messages of solidarity, anger, and disbelief flooded in from across the country. The momentum was irreversible. Lively turned on his heel and stormed out, the door banging behind him, his power already slipping. Bailey sat down hard, relief and adrenaline mingling with a fear that would not leave. Jade touched his hand. "We're not finished. But you're not alone anymore." He nodded, emotion thick in his throat. Around the table, hope burned, fierce, contagious. With the evidence finally in the open and the world watching, Bailey knew the time had come for the next battle, to take the fight beyond the town's borders and demand justice in the halls of federal law. The downtown towers of the city glittered in the morning sun, glass and steel monuments to order and prosperity. Yet inside the maze of government buildings, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Bailey arrived at the office of the federal civil rights attorney with a box of documents in his hands and the weight of a movement behind him. This was not the first time he'd entered a courthouse, but it was the first time he'd done so as a man transformed, no longer just a grieving father but the public face of a storm. Ariel, pale and resolute, accompanied him, a scarf hiding the scars but not the pain. Jade Thomas flanked them both, already fielding messages from reporters, activists, and watchdog groups. The elevator climbed in silence, every floor rising like another step up a mountain no one wanted to climb. In the oak-paneled waiting room, Bailey eyed the portraits of federal judges, solemn, white, mostly male, staring down as if to test his resolve. When the receptionist finally led them in, the civil rights attorney, Carla Brenner, was waiting, her office lined with volumes on constitutional law and a single, faded poster of Thurgood Marshall. Brenner stood, her handshake brisk, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Johnson, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Thomas, you have the floor," Bailey spoke, voice calm but electric with conviction. "We're bringing a federal suit under Section 1983 for violation of Ariel's civil rights against Officer Darren Lively, the Briarwood Police Department, and the Jefferson Chemical Corporation. The evidence is here: video, chain of custody logs, witness statements, a documented campaign of intimidation and retaliation." He pushed the files across the polished desk. Brenner opened them, paging through the stills of acid burns, the screen captures from the security video, the inventory logs that linked the acid's disappearance to the very officer now pleading innocence on local TV. Brenner listened, expression unreadable. She glanced at Jade. "I've seen your reporting. I know the stakes." Jade nodded, her voice steady. "This is bigger than Briarwood. If we let it die there, the message is clear to every town just like it." But even as the attorney made notes, her frown deepened. "You realize what you're asking. This will bring national scrutiny, and you can expect backlash from every angle: the police union, the corporate lobby, the local politicians. Witnesses may disappear. Records may get lost. My office is already under pressure not to take this case. Frankly, I have to think about my own family." Ariel broke her silence, her voice a rasp but unwavering. "They tried to kill me. If you turn away, what hope is left for the next girl?" The question hung in the air. Brenner met Ariel's gaze, the silent calculation playing out in the lines of her face. Then, with the sigh that seemed to unburden years, she turned to Bailey. "You have a reputation, Mr. Johnson. Your work in the union, your history on the school board. People will listen if you speak. But you have to be prepared for the fight of your life. Once we file, there's no walking it back." Bailey straightened, exhaustion and fury braided into a quiet dignity. "We've already been fighting for our lives. Now we fight for the truth." Brenner nodded. "All right, I'll take the case. But understand, you and your family will be in the spotlight. They will come after everything you love." Jade leaned in, voice almost a whisper. "We're ready. We have allies now, and we have the truth." The next hours were a blur of affidavits, signatures, and phone calls, each one pushing the case forward, each one making it harder to turn back. Jade left for another round of investigation, tracking rumors of money changing hands between the factory managers and high-ranking officers, digging for a pattern of complaints buried in old court records. As the sun began to sink behind the courthouse, the first headlines appeared online. Federal suit filed in Briarwood. Acid attack. Anonymous sources within the police department began whispering of outside agitators. The chemical plant's lawyers issued a bland denial, vowing to vigorously defend their good name. The blue wall and the corporate machine shifted into counterattack, moving to buy off witnesses, pressure journalists, erase digital trails, and muddy the waters with fresh rounds of disinformation. Yet inside Carla Brenner's office, Bailey, Ariel, and Jade stood shoulder to shoulder, uncertain, battered, but no longer alone. As they watched the first copy of their federal complaint slide off the printer, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, the air charged with both dread and hope. But victory would not come quietly. The powers that had ruled Briarwood for generations were prepared to fight back with everything they had, forcing Bailey and his allies to defend the truth on every front, even as the cost climbed higher with every passing day. The boardroom at Jefferson Chemical, usually the domain of quarterly projections and dull strategy sessions, was suffused with urgency and quiet menace this morning. The shades were drawn against the rising sun, muting the harsh light as the city outside rumbled with talk of lawsuits and betrayal. Inside, only whispers of nervousness betrayed the gravity of the moment. The long table was littered with manila folders, confidential memos, and a tray of untouched coffee gone cold. At the head, CEO Daniel Grant fixed each of his colleagues with a look that brooked no interruption. His skin was taut over high cheekbones, his eyes flicking from the corporate lawyer beside him to the sullen, uniformed presence of Chief Mallory, and finally to Officer Darren Lively, who sat rigid and pale at the far end, hands knotted together as if bracing for a blow. "We have a federal complaint on our hands," Grant began, his voice as cold and smooth as the glass skyline beyond the blinds. "We have social media mobs, and we have a maintenance man leaking files to the opposition. That is, 3 problems, none of them acceptable." The company's general counsel, Victoria Penn, leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping a dossier. "We're already moving to suppress further leaks. All internal communications are being monitored. Legal has reached out to employees most likely to talk. We are offering incentives, severance, NDAs, whatever is required." Chief Mallory's jaw clenched. Internal Affairs is leaning on the union. Anyone who so much as breathes to an outsider is on unpaid leave, pending investigation. But the feds are watching us. I can't make this all disappear. Not this time. Officer Lively, sweating, found his voice. "They have a video, sir. I didn't know." Marcus, the night guy, he must have copied it. "I thought I took care of it." Penn shot him a withering glance. "You should have done your job properly the first time, officer. Now it's damage control. I want to know every single person Marcus ever worked with, talked to, took breaks with. Find him and remind him what happens to whistleblowers in this town." A chill ran through the room. The mask of corporate respectability slipped, revealing the hard calculus beneath. Grant's tone sharpened. "As for the Johnson family, we can't touch them directly, but we can make their lives hell. Threats, lawsuits, anonymous calls, the usual tools. Mallory, put pressure on the family's friends, their employers, their church. Make them feel alone. If the girl's condition worsens, we spin it as an unfortunate escalation caused by the stress of her father's actions." Victoria Penn nodded. "Meanwhile, our PR firm will flood the networks. New reports, expert opinions, social media influences, all pushing a counter-narrative. We discredit the witnesses. We question the integrity of the evidence. We paint Bailey Johnson as an agitator with a checkered past. We find something, anything, to put a shadow on that family's story." Mallory folded his arms, voice low. "Be careful, Penn. This is national news now. Too much pressure, and it could backfire." "Leave the messaging to me," Penn replied, ice in every word. Grant dismissed them one by one, each given a task. Hunt down Marcus, silence the rest. Turn up the noise until truth was buried beneath a landslide of plausible deniability. Down in the employee break room, a rumor raced ahead of official orders. Marcus had been spotted slipping out the back after his shift, eyes wild, mumbling about not letting them get away with it. Within an hour, 2 men in dark jackets, unknown to most of the staff but clearly company muscle, were asking questions, checking parking lots, making veiled threats. Bailey received his first death threat that afternoon. A photo of Ariel's hospital window with a message scrawled beneath. "Some people don't know when to quit." The phone rang, the caller ID blocked. A voice hissed, "Drop the case, Johnson, or she won't see another sunrise." Marcus, meanwhile, went to ground. Living in borrowed rooms, using payphones, his nerves stretched thin. Every knock made him jump, every shadow a warning. Jade Thomas reported that her own sources were being harassed. Her editor pressured to kill her next story. Anonymous emails filled with slander and threats crowded her inbox, but she refused to back down. Yet, for every act of intimidation, the public's anger burned brighter. Online, new hashtags trended by the hour: "Protect the Whitakers," "Find Marcus," "Jefferson Cover-Up." Even old rivals and cynical journalists began to ask questions, demand access, push for transparency. The company's control over the story, so absolute in years past, now faced the wild unpredictability of a networked world. But, as the net closed around Marcus and the Johnsons, danger grew more immediate, more violent, the old power structures clinging desperately to the illusion of control. Outside corporate walls, the pressure boiled over. Across the city, across the country, galvanizing a community desperate for justice and placing the Johnson family in the crosshairs of a battle they could no longer fight alone. The transfer to the federal safe house was conducted under a blanket of secrecy that felt less like safety and more like exile. Bailey, Ariel, and Marcus were whisked away from familiar streets in black SUVs, windows tinted to obscure the world they were being torn from. Even Jade Thomas, now the family's unofficial voice to the outside, rode in a separate convoy. Her presence now both shield and target. The new facility was a nondescript federal building on the outskirts of the city, wrapped in concrete and layers of surveillance. Security cameras panned every hallway, the echo of footsteps amplified by sterile walls. Yet inside the so-called safe room, the Johnsons found no comfort, only a persistent sense that the world outside had become a hunt, and they, the quarry. An FBI liaison, Agent Monroe, briefed them with the detached efficiency of someone for whom such emergencies were routine. "Mr. Johnson, Ms. Johnson, Mr. Marcus, you'll remain here under federal protection until the trial date or until threat assessments change. All communication will be monitored. Your safety is the agency's top priority." Bailey's gratitude warred with suspicion. "And what happens when the agency's priorities change, Agent? I've seen protection come and go before." Monroe's reply was careful, diplomatic. "You have national attention now. That buys you some insurance. But be aware, the local authorities are fighting us at every turn. This isn't just about your case. It's about a system that doesn't want to be exposed." Ariel, bandaged and frail but growing in spirit, found a sliver of strength as the messages poured in from across the country. Supporters sent cards, artwork, small tokens, virtual and real, affirming that her pain was not invisible. She watched video messages of strangers marching, chanting her name, lighting candles outside courthouses in towns she'd never heard of. For the first time since the attack, her nightmares faded enough for her to sleep. Still, the threat was never far. Marcus, haunted by the betrayal that had forced him into hiding, remained vigilant. He prowled the perimeter at night, listening for unusual sounds, cataloging the routines of every agent in the building. It was Marcus who first sensed the unease, who noticed a guard lingering a moment too long at a locked door, who picked up a whispered conversation in a hallway where no one was supposed to be. "Something's wrong," Marcus murmured to Bailey as dawn crept over the city. "They know where we are. I can feel it in my bones." Bailey, exhausted but unwilling to surrender to fear, pressed Agent Monroe. "You have a leak. Someone's feeding our location to the people trying to kill us." Monroe bristled, but the evidence was impossible to ignore. That afternoon, the security system registered a breach. An unmarked vehicle loitered outside the perimeter, its driver masked, a second man on foot taking pictures of exits. Federal marshals went on high alert. For 10 breathless minutes, Bailey clutched Ariel's hand as alarms echoed down the corridors and agents armed themselves for a confrontation. It was Marcus who spotted the suspicious activity first, who relayed it to security just in time. The intruders fled, squealing tires, but not before leaving behind a chilling message. Spray painted across a dumpster, "You can't hide forever." The attack, though thwarted, sent tremors through every level of protection. Bailey saw the haunted looks in the agent's eyes, the tightening of Monroe's jaw. Ariel's old fears surged back, yet when Jade arrived that evening, she found the family, especially Ariel, transformed by resolve rather than shattered by terror. Jade brought news, her eyes shining with purpose. "They tried to break us, but the world's watching now. I'm putting together a special report, an exposé that will lay bare the entire system behind what happened to you. Not just Lively, not just the plant, but every thread of this network that lets black lives be traded for silence." Bailey managed a tired but genuine smile. "You give us hope, Jade. That's more protection than any badge." But outside, the storm raged on, enemies growing bolder, allies more committed, the whole nation choosing sides. Within the walls of federal protection, the Johnsons learned that true safety was never a matter of locks and guards, but the refusal to be cowed by injustice, no matter how relentless. As Jade's exposé took shape, the ripples of the Johnsons' ordeal spread through the city, shining a harsh light on the hidden machinery of systemic racism, and preparing the ground for a reckoning no one could prevent. When Jade Thomas's exposé finally aired, it was more than a television segment, it was a rupture. Broadcast on the largest news network in the country, the documentary-style special took up a full hour of primetime, every minute cutting deeper into the machinery of injustice that had operated in Briarwood for decades. The program opened with a voiceover, Jade's, steady but trembling with emotion, setting the stage not as an isolated tragedy but as the symptom of a far larger disease. Archival footage rolled across the screen, a collage of police brutality protests, still shots of black families at hospital bedsides, closed-door city council meetings, and rows of shuttered factories, promising jobs, but delivering only poison. Then the focus shifted, zooming in on Ariel, her face a landscape of pain and endurance. Her father's hand in hers, the scars visible and invisible. Viewers across America watched as Jade presented irrefutable evidence. The raw video of Officer Lively collecting the acid drum, the time-stamped logs linking the chemical plant to the police department, and sworn testimony from workers like Marcus, who spoke, faces shadowed, of a culture of fear and retribution. There were hidden camera interviews with families whose sons and daughters had suffered under the same badge, whose voices had been silenced or erased until now. The segment's emotional climax came when Bailey appeared on screen, his anger simmering beneath the dignity of his words. "My family's not looking for vengeance. We want what everyone wants. A life free from fear. If we let them bury the truth now, the next girl won't get a second chance. And neither will her father." Ariel's quiet voice followed, recorded in her hospital bed, her eyes fixed on the future. "This happened to me because people thought nobody would care. But you're watching. You can care." In living rooms and bars, on phones and laptops, across all 50 states, the country responded. Hashtags flooded every platform, with calls for justice echoing through the night. Civil rights leaders shared the footage. Churches and mosques opened their doors to prayer vigils, and protesters gathered outside city halls with signs that carried Ariel's name aloft alongside those of so many others. The impact was immediate. National organizations for police accountability issued urgent statements. Legal aid societies mobilized to offer their services, and human rights attorneys flew in from other states. State politicians, once comfortably silent, found themselves cornered by reporters, forced to denounce the violence and promise action. By week's end, the governor had announced the formation of an independent commission to investigate the Briarwood Police and Jefferson Chemicals' role. Federal prosecutors requested documentation. Subpoenas flew. Panic gripped the city's elite. The repercussions were swift. The chemical plant lost its largest contract with a Fortune 500 buyer, its stock price tumbling in a matter of hours. The mayor convened an emergency meeting behind closed doors, desperate to contain the damage. Chief Mallory was placed on administrative leave. Anonymous tips began to flood the city's hotline, some from those who had once stayed silent, emboldened now by the flood of public outrage. But for the Johnsons, the cost of truth grew sharper. Bailey's phone vibrated with a text message late one night, a photo of Ariel, a safe, asleep in her hospital bed, taken through a window he'd thought was secure. The message read, "Step into that courtroom and everyone pays." Bailey stood at Ariel's bedside, fear cold and ancient in his blood. Yet as he watched his daughter sleep, her body scarred, but spirit unbroken. Resolve eclipsed the terror. He knew the threat was real as the shadows that had always haunted black families daring to demand justice in America. But for the first time, he was not alone. The eyes of a nation were watching, and so was the conscience of history. He sent a reply to the unknown number, his fingers steady. "We will not back down." The fight would not end in the shadows. If there was a price to be paid, he would pay it. In the full glare of the world's attention, with the nation awake and the machinery of power on its heels, Bailey gathered his courage, took Ariel's hand, and prepared to walk together into the most public, perilous battle of their lives, the final showdown in the court of law and the court of American opinion. The courthouse was an island of stone and glass standing in the heart of a city now torn between shame and awakening. On the morning of the first hearing, television trucks lined the curb, their antennas bristling skyward. Protesters and counter-protesters clustered on the steps, waving signs and shouting, while federal marshals and city police ringed the entrance with wary eyes. Bailey held Ariel's hand as they entered through a side door, shielded from the chaos but not from the weight of a nation's expectation. Inside, the courtroom was hushed, every bench crowded with faces, some hungry for justice, others determined to keep the old order intact. Journalists tapped feverishly at laptops, their stories already halfway written. The panel of judges presided from a high dais, robes solemn, gazes hard to read. Bailey sat at the plaintiff's table, his suit pressed but ill-fitting. He had never wanted to play lawyer, but no one else could give voice to what had been done to his daughter. Ariel sat beside him, her scars visible, yet her eyes clear. Marcus, hands trembling but chin high, waited nearby as a witness. Across the aisle, Officer Lively sat with his legal team, their faces a study in forced composure and steely denial. When the trial began, Bailey stood, his voice trembling at first but gathering strength with every sentence. He laid out the timeline: Ariel's injury, the acid drum, the altered records, the video, the threat. With Jade's help, he produced hard evidence and called Marcus to the stand, where the maintenance man's voice shook but did not break. Marcus described the night of the attack, the company's backdoor deals, the way fear had ruled every silence in Briarwood. Screens lit up with security footage, the time-stamped logs, the damning delivery forms. For every rebuttal from the defense, Bailey countered with another witness, another chain in the link of truth. Yet the opposition was relentless. The chemical plant's lawyer, a polished litigator from the Capitol, called their own witnesses, experts who claimed Ariel's wounds could have come from her own carelessness, a company supervisor who swore that security procedures were always followed, even a former neighbor who spun tales of Bailey's supposed troublemaking. At every turn they twisted the story, clouding motives, insinuating fraud, seeding doubt. The police union's lawyer thundered about the sacrifices officers make and accused Bailey of smearing a decorated public servant. During a lunch recess, Ariel received a text from an anonymous number. "Testify and it's your funeral." Bailey's phone rang with a bomb threat against the courthouse, one of 3 that day alone. Federal marshals swept the building, alarms blaring, and the hearing was suspended as panicked crowds evacuated into the cold street. In the chaos outside, news crews scrambled for shots of Bailey, Ariel, and Marcus huddled under a police cordon, faces pale but unbowed. A throng of supporters chanted Ariel's name, while on the other side of the plaza, counter-protesters jeered. The courthouse doors remained locked for hours, rumors swirling about who had called in the threats and who would benefit if the trial was derailed. Back inside, the judges announced a postponement, citing security and the integrity of the process. The defense seized the moment, demanding the suit be dismissed for lack of safety, accusing the Johnsons of inciting unrest. Bailey, exhausted and raw, nearly faltered, but Ariel steadied him, her fingers lacing through his. "Dad, we can't let them win, no matter how much they scare us." That night, Bailey gathered his team in a drab hotel room. Jade, Marcus, and a new legal advisor reviewed every detail of the day's testimony. "We need a new strategy," Bailey said, his voice steely now, the old hesitation burned away. "They will stop at nothing. Neither can we." Ariel spoke softly but fiercely, determination radiating from her wounded frame. "I want to testify. No more running, no more letting them own the story." Bailey looked at his daughter, the one thing in this world he died to protect, and saw not just his own hope, but the hope of every parent, every community beaten down by the system and forced to choose between safety and justice. He nodded, a tear escaping down his cheek. "Then we'll do this together." Outside, the courthouse loomed, the night pressing in with the threat of more violence, more threats. But inside the Johnson family and their allies, a deeper courage was taking root. Tomorrow the fight would continue. This time, they would not yield an inch. As night fell over the city and the federal courthouse stood silent under heavy guard, Bailey resolved that the next round would require not just evidence and courage, but a strategy as ruthless and unyielding as the forces arrayed against them. The true battle for justice was only beginning. The temporary hotel safehouse, set on the city's edge under the watchful eyes of anonymous security, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. Fluorescent light flickered over cheap wallpaper, and the air always carried the nervous scent of coffee, sweat, and uncertainty. As evening settled in, Bailey paced the narrow hall between his and Ariel's adjoining rooms. a storm of anger, grief, and exhaustion inside him. The legal team regrouped after the day's bomb threats, but optimism was thin. Marcus, who'd once faced down supervisors and security with a shrug, now sat in the corner, knees drawn to his chest, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not safe anywhere," he muttered, flinching every time the elevator chimed. The others were little better. Jade Thomas typed furiously on her laptop, chasing leads for another story, her face drawn and haunted. Even Carla Brenner, the veteran federal lawyer, admitted, "We've never had this kind of coordinated intimidation before. Every call is traced, every file hacked. Someone's leaking everything." Suspicion crept through the room like a chill. Bailey noticed how the security detail avoided eye contact, how their conversations sometimes dropped to a hush when he approached. More than once he caught an agent staring at his phone with furtive intensity, then looking away too quickly. Ariel tried to hold them together, her words as steady as her hands. "They want us to break. They want us afraid. That's the only way they win." Her resolve sparked something in Bailey, a reminder of why this fight could not be abandoned, no matter how overwhelming it felt. Yet beneath her encouragement, paranoia thrived. One evening, as they prepared for the next day in court, a hotel staff member slipped an envelope under the door. Inside, a printed threat, cut-out letters, classic as any thriller. "Trust no one inside, not even the feds." It was unsigned, but the warning felt too plausible to ignore. Marcus, visibly shaken, stared at the message. What if it's true? What if they bought someone off? I've seen men turn on each other for a lot less than what's at stake here. Bailey tried to soothe him. "We're together now, Marcus. They want us to suspect each other. Don't let them." But doubt gnawed at him, especially after Ariel whispered, "Dad, the agent on the night shift, the one who never meets your eyes. I don't trust him." That night, Bailey couldn't sleep. He roamed the corridors, pausing by the security station at the end of the hall. A new FBI agent, Sharp, sat behind the desk scrolling through his phone, his manner oddly jumpy. Bailey watched as Sharp slipped a text from a private number, then checked his watch, making notes on a pad that vanished the moment he saw Bailey. The next morning, Bailey pulled Carla and Jade aside. "I think we've got a leak. It's Sharp. I saw him texting after the threat last night. His body language was all wrong. Someone on the inside is selling us out." Brenner frowned, but Jade quickly pulled up her laptop, hacking into public records and social feeds. In minutes, they found a payment flagged to a numbered account. Large, recent, routed through a shell company linked to the chemical plant's legal team. It coincided perfectly with Agent Sharp's sudden transfer to the case. With mounting dread, Bailey, Jade, and Carla confronted Sharp in the hotel lobby. Bailey, his voice ice cold, laid out what they'd discovered, ending with a stare that refused to waver. "You sold us out, didn't you? You were supposed to protect my family. Instead, you're the reason those threats keep finding us." Sharp tried denial, blustering about protocol, but when Brenner produced the bank record, his resolve broke. "You don't know what these people can do," he whispered, eyes darting to the exits. "They've got reach, even in the bureau. They said if I didn't cooperate, my kids—" He broke off, shaking. Bailey didn't blink. "You chose. And now, you're done. You'll testify or the next room you see will have bars on the windows." Federal agents hustled Sharp away, security swarming the hotel. In the aftermath, relief and exhaustion washed over Bailey and the others. For the first time in days, they felt some control return, however fleeting. Marcus exhaled shakily. "Maybe we have a shot. Maybe they're not untouchable." Ariel, her courage now burning like a torch, squeezed her father's hand. "They wanted us to be afraid of each other. Instead, they just gave us another reason to fight." As calm settled, Jade's phone pinged. A new tip, this time from a whistleblower deep inside Jefferson Chemical. A cache of emails and files, proof that the company had orchestrated not just the attack, but years of systemic abuse and bribery. While trust among allies was reforged in fire, Jade set out to uncover the next piece of the puzzle, one that could tip the scales and expose the full scope of Briarwood's corruption before it was too late. The city slept under a quilt of sodium streetlight and cold, restless wind. But in the industrial district, a different kind of electricity pulsed, one that had nothing to do with power lines and everything to do with secrets and risk. Jade Thomas, nerves on edge and instincts honed by months of being watched, hurried through the labyrinthine alleys behind Jefferson Chemical, the glow from her phone screen the only guide. She moved with purpose, not alone. At her side was Tyler Grant, a wiry, quick-eyed 20-something with a backpack full of gadgets. A former coding whiz from Ariel's college days, now drawn into the battle by friendship, outrage, and the promise of redemption. Waiting for them near the rear service door was Marcus, who'd worked every night shift and knew the rhythms of the plant better than any executive. He checked his watch. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before the next security sweep. Once we're inside, stay quiet and follow me." Tyler fidgeted, checking his gear. "You sure you want to do this, Jade, if we get caught?" Jade's answer was a dry whisper. "If we don't get caught. This ends tonight, let's move." They slipped in through a poorly latched side entrance, Marcus guiding them through shadowy corridors. At the far end of the loading dock, a steel door led to the data room, a high-security vault of digital archives supposedly off-limits even to most management. Marcus used a borrowed keycard and a whispered prayer, the lock clicking open after a tense moment. Inside, rows of humming servers flickered in the gloom, blue lights blinking like the pulse of a sleeping beast. Tyler dove into action, plugging a drive into the terminal and muttering lines of code as the system's security tried and failed to bar his way. "I'm in," he breathed. "Give me 10 minutes." Jade's hands shook as she watched the data cascade across the monitor. Folders labeled logistics, law enforcement, and payments appeared, the latter tagged with innocuous codenames: support fund, community incentive, legacy clients. But beneath the bland titles were years of transactions, shipments of acid and other hazardous chemicals, logged out to local police, invoices for consulting services routed to shell companies linked to city officials, even internal memos about media management and payments marked retainer. Election year, Tyler's eyes widened. They've been paying off city council, judges, maybe even state inspectors. And here, look at these timestamps. The same night Ariel was attacked, a shipment log directly to Lively's badge number. They didn't even bother to hide it. Marcus leaned over, voice a hoarse growl. "Get copies of everything. Not just for us. If something happens, this has to see the light." Jade nodded. Her resolve was steeled by the evidence. For so long it had been their word against the systems, hope against power. Now, for the first time, the scales tipped. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. Marcus froze, face draining of color. Security patrol. 2 minutes, tops. Tyler worked faster, dumping encrypted files to a pair of flash drives, wiping logs as he went. Jade's heart hammered as a flashlight beam swept under the door. "Someone's in there!" a muffled voice shouted. The door handle rattled, then twisted. "Go!" Marcus hissed, leading them to a utility hatch behind the server rack. They squeezed through just as the main door burst open, security guards flooding the room, radios crackling. The chase was frantic, a blur of alarms, clattering boots, breathless sprints through service tunnels, and chemical-scented stairwells. Marcus threw himself against a heavy fire door, shoving Jade and Tyler into the parking lot as shouts erupted behind them. They didn't stop running until they reached an alley where Bailey waited in a battered sedan, engine running and headlights off. Tyler dove into the back seat, clutching the flash drives to his chest. Jade, gasping, passed Bailey the drives. "It's all here. Every payment, every order, every name." Bailey's face was carved from stone, eyes glittering with something like hope for the first time in weeks. "You just changed everything." As they sped away into the night, police sirens wailed in the distance. Jade wiped sweat from her brow, adrenaline mixing with exhaustion. Now we see if truth is enough. Back at the hotel, they pored over the files, every transaction a nail in the coffin for the conspirators, every memo a map of the corruption that had ruined so many lives. Ariel listened as Tyler read out names, judges, officers, council members, her anger and hope mingling in the same heartbeat. For the first time, it felt as though the enemy's fortress had cracked. There would be no more he said, she said. There would be proof, irrefutable, damning, and ready for the world. Armed with the truth, Bailey began preparing the final assault in court, determined that the coming trial would not only be the fight for his daughter, but the reckoning for an entire city's soul. The federal courthouse was a fortress under siege. Media trucks surrounded the building, their satellite dishes pointed like weapons toward justice, while demonstrators crowded the steps, some chanting for Ariel, some waving signs in defense of law and order. Helicopters thudded overhead as the world watched, breathless for the final battle to unfold. Inside, the air shimmered with the tension of the century. Every seat in the public gallery was filled. Families of other victims, civil rights leaders, students, clergy, and neighbors who once kept their heads down but now whispered prayers for the Johnsons. Behind the plaintiff's table, Bailey's face betrayed a mix of exhaustion and ferocious determination. He wore the scars of the past year not as wounds, but as badges of survival. Ariel, her posture upright and eyes steady despite her injuries, radiated a quiet strength that made even seasoned reporters lean forward in their seats. The opposition's table bristled with high-praxed legal firepower. Officer Lively sat among his attorneys, sweat shining on his brow, eyes darting from the judges to the damning mountain of evidence that now lay before the court. Bailey opened with a voice that echoed far beyond the courtroom walls. He called Marcus first, who walked unsteadily to the stand, nerves visible but voice unwavering, as he detailed the chain of events. The night of the acid attack, the whispered warnings, the company's backroom dealings. Then came Tyler, the young hacker, his testimony crisp and technical as he walked the court through file after file. Logs of acid shipments, payment schedules, internal memos signed off by both police and company executives. Jade, her voice clear and measured, provided the human context, a journalist's perspective on how the machinery of racism and greed had operated for years in Briarwood. At every turn, the defense objected, on grounds of admissibility, chain of custody, motive, each time overruled by a panel of judges now alive to the magnitude of the case. Still, the opposition struck back hard. They called character witnesses who painted Bailey as angry and uncooperative, questioned Ariel's mental stability, produced expert testimony to sow confusion about the chemicals, the security footage, the company's business as usual. The defense's star moment came when Officer Lively, in a last bid for sympathy, took the stand. He described a career of service, spun a story of tragic misunderstanding, and, with a practiced tremor in his voice, declared, "I have never hated anyone for the color of their skin. I tried to help that girl. The whole thing was an accident." His lawyer pounced on inconsistencies in witness statements, tried to paint the investigation as a witch hunt, but Bailey was ready. In a moment of devastating calm, he presented the digital audit trail, emails confirming Lively's direct requests for acid, internal notes referring to keeping certain people in line, and, most damning, a memo from the company's legal team. All media requests regarding the Johnson incident to be coordinated through central office. Delay all cooperation until further notice. Bailey stood, his voice shaking with anger and resolve. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not an accident. This was not one bad cop. This was a system, a conspiracy to silence, to punish, to destroy a young black woman's life because her pain was inconvenient for powerful men. My daughter has lived with those scars every single day. I ask you not just for justice for Ariel, but for every person in this city who has been told their truth doesn't matter. The room fell silent as Ariel wheeled herself to the front, insisting on giving her own testimony. Her words were unvarnished and raw. I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted to work, to live, to be safe. When I screamed for help that night, nobody came, not because they couldn't, but because the world taught them I wasn't worth saving. But I am still here. I refuse to hide, and I refuse to let what happened to me happen to the next girl, or the next family, or anyone else. Even the judges seemed moved, one clearing his throat with what could only be called emotion. The final witness took the stand, a financial auditor, who, independent of all parties, testified to the incontrovertible pattern of illegal payments, falsified records, and coordinated cover-up. The defense mounted one last desperate attack, accusing the witnesses of collusion, floating conspiracy theories about doctored files, even suggesting Bailey and Marcus had orchestrated the attack for publicity. But as their arguments unraveled under cross-examination, the mood shifted in the courtroom. Certainty replaced suspicion, empathy broke through cynicism. As closing arguments echoed in the marble chamber, the world outside waited. News anchors speculated, activists held vigils, and a city paused for breath. The judges retired to deliberate, leaving a silence thick with hope and fear. Bailey, exhausted, wrapped his arm around Ariel, who, despite the toll, radiated a defiant peace. "No matter what they say," she whispered, "we told the truth. That's more than most ever get to do." The courtroom, the city, and the nation held their collective breath as the judges prepared to render a verdict, one that would reverberate far beyond Briarwood, shaping the soul of American justice for generations to come. The federal courtroom, long a stage for ritual and order, had never felt more electric. The gallery was packed, every eye straining for a glimpse of history. Camera crews spilled into the halls, their red lights winking like beacons, while beyond the courthouse steps the city thrummed with restless hope and fear. News anchors called it the trial of the decade, but to those inside, it felt far larger. An hour that could reshape the very terms of American justice. Bailey sat at the plaintiff's table with Ariel's hand in his, their fingers entwined, as if sheer will could anchor them through the storm. His jaw was clenched tight, his gaze fixed on the three-judge panel and the jury that had just returned from deliberation. Around them, Jade Thomas, Marcus, Tyler, and the swelling ranks of supporters kept their vigil. Some silent in prayer, others murmuring encouragement as if willing justice into being. Officer Lively, once the face of the city's blue wall, now slouched between his attorneys, eyes glazed and skin pale. The company executives, once untouchable in their tailored suits, sat rigid, their confidence evaporated, a nervous energy swirling among their ranks. In the rows reserved for city officials, unease rippled. Some fidgeted, others stared straight ahead, knowing their own names could soon echo through the chambers of justice. The judges entered, black robes trailing, faces grave. The foreperson of the jury rose, paper trembling in her hand. The room fell, utterly silent, time suspended between two breaths. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, the jury finds the defendant, Officer Darren Lively, guilty. The words rang out, each syllable a hammer blow. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. On the charge of willful violation of civil rights, guilty. A murmur swept the gallery, tears spilling freely, fists raised in silent triumph. Bailey felt his knees weaken, Ariel's grip tightening as if to hold them both upright. But, the foreperson continued, voice growing steadier, we further find that the actions of Jefferson Chemical and its executives constitute reckless endangerment, conspiracy, and fraud. The judge's gavel fell, punctuating the verdict with a finality that rippled through every heart present. The court ordered not only massive restitution to Ariel and the affected families, but mandated sweeping reforms and criminal prosecution of the company's leadership and several implicated city officials. Officer Lively, his face slack, was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. Cameras flashed, the world watching as the mask fell at last. The CEO of Jefferson Chemical, a man who once dictated policy with a pen, stood motionless as federal marshals moved in. Reporters shouted questions drowned out by cheers and sobs. The reaction inside was tidal. Families of past victims wept openly, strangers embraced, and activists surged toward Bailey and Ariel, hoisting signs that read, "Justice is possible," "Black Lives Matter," and "No more silence." Outside, crowds erupted, the courthouse steps filled with chants, songs, and an outpouring of communal relief, anger, and hope. For a city and a nation long told to accept the way things are, this was something new, a promise kept, if only for a moment. Bailey, overwhelmed, looked to Ariel, who stood as tall as her battered body allowed. She wiped her tears and smiled, her voice just above a whisper. "They heard us, Dad. They finally heard us." Reporters clamored for quotes, but Bailey's answer was simple and unscripted. "This isn't just for my daughter. This is for every child, every family, every voice that was drowned out by fear or power. We did not win because we are special. We won because we refused to stop telling the truth." The judges, in their closing statement, acknowledged not just the individual suffering, but the systemic failures that had allowed such suffering to fester. "The law must be a living promise," the chief judge intoned, "not merely for the privileged or the powerful, but for every citizen, especially those too often left in the shadow." Yet even as the victory reverberated, word came that the federal investigation was only beginning. The Department of Justice, pressed by the tidal wave of public outrage and evidence, announced an unprecedented audit of city contracts, police practices, and industrial oversight. Bailey understood what this meant. The verdict was not an ending, but a beginning. Those who once ruled by intimidation now found themselves hunted by the very justice they had mocked. That night, as the family returned to their hotel under guard, crowds gathered outside with candles, their flames flickering in the dusk. A choir sang quietly, an old spiritual of hope and deliverance. Ariel leaned on Bailey's shoulder, whispering, "It's not over, but I'm not afraid anymore." He nodded, his voice steady at last. "Neither am I." Even as the first arrests and reforms swept through the city, the Johnsons emerged as new symbols for a movement bigger than any single trial. Their journey, once isolated and embattled, had become a rallying cry for justice, proving that when the truth is spoken, it can topple even the mightiest walls. The morning after the verdict, Briarwood was not the same city. Headlines screamed across every newspaper stand. "Justice at last. Walls of silence fall. Feds move in." While national networks ran breathless coverage of the courthouse steps and candle-lit vigils stretching into the dawn. The Johnsons awoke to a world transformed by their courage, but also one boiling with uncertainty, possibility, and the restless energy of unfinished business. Federal agents fanned out across the city, arrest warrants in hand. Police cars and unmarked sedans crisscrossed neighborhoods once ruled by silent fear. For every camera that captured the handcuffed perp walk of another disgraced official, there were 10 more quiet stories of detectives facing questions for the first time, of city accountants sweating through depositions, of industrial managers calling lawyers in the dead of night. Jefferson Chemical's headquarters, once a temple to profit, became a fortress under siege, its boardrooms emptied, its name now synonymous with corruption. The Department of Justice declared Briarwood a site of extraordinary federal oversight, announcing sweeping investigations into police procedures, municipal contracts, and the shadowy networks that had operated unchecked for years. Every corner of the city, schools, churches, council chambers, buzzed with rumor and revelation. Whistleblowers found their courage, tipping off investigators, supplying ledgers and phone records that cracked the walls of the old regime wide open. Bailey watched the city convulse from the safety of a guarded suite, every emotion warring within him: vindication, exhaustion, a strange sense of detachment, as if witnessing an earthquake from high ground. Marcus, who had risked everything to bring the truth to light, sat at his side, eyes red-rimmed but alive with hope. "You did it, man," he said, voice trembling. "You and Ariel, you showed them." Jade, notebook never far from hand, documented the faces in the crowd, the slogans painted on homemade banners, the speeches that echoed from church pulpits to courthouse lawns. "We're seeing history," she told Bailey, "not just for you or Ariel, but for every black family that ever had to swallow injustice because the world wouldn't listen." The reckoning was not without cost. Small clusters of hardliners lashed out, graffiti scrawled on new murals, threatening calls to journalists and activists, a shattered window at the old church where Ariel's name was now part of a memorial wall. But these flashes of hate were met with a stronger, deeper unity. Neighborhoods, once divided by suspicion, now watched over each other. Older men patrolled blocks at night, young mothers left casseroles at the Johnsons' door, and faith leaders from every tradition marched together, proclaiming that Briarwood's new legacy would not be one of fear, but of renewal. Ariel herself became an emblem of this rebirth. Invitations poured in for interviews, speaking engagements, and award ceremonies, but she turned most of them down, focused instead on quiet healing and the work that lay ahead. When she finally spoke to a crowd gathered at the university where her education had been interrupted, her voice cut through the noise with a clarity that stilled even the most skeptical listeners. "I am not a hero," Ariel said, her words slow, deliberate, and ringing with truth. "I am proof that pain can be transformed, that a single life, scarred and battered, can ignite a movement if enough people are willing to stand up and say, 'Enough.'" In that moment, the personal merged with the political. What had begun as one family's nightmare became a city's reckoning, and for many, a second chance. Morning still. The struggle for justice left its mark. Bailey found himself weeping at odd moments. Memories of Ariel's screams and courtroom betrayals never far from the surface. Marcus attended therapy for the first time in his life, trying to make sense of years spent in silence and the sudden dizzying glare of public vindication. Jade faced online harassment and threats, but pressed on, publishing story after story, refusing to let the city look away. Yet for every wound there was a sign of change. Former adversaries reached out. Cops who had once sneered at Bailey's complaints now offered apologies, and sometimes promises to do better. City leaders began hosting public forums, inviting the families of victims to help draft new policies. Federal agents stayed, not as conquerors but as watchdogs, their presence a constant reminder that the eyes of the nation were still upon Briarwood. In the end, What mattered most was not the spectacle of arrests or the headlines that would fade in weeks or months. It was the way pain, channeled and harnessed, became the muscle of change. Each protest, each tear, each risk taken in the name of truth. These had set something in motion that could not easily be undone. Amidst the city's reckoning, as dust settled on the ruins of the old order, Arielle quietly prepared to reclaim her interrupted dream. Returning to campus, determined to build a new future not only for herself but for the generation rising in her wake, the old campus clock tower, witness to so many beginnings and endings, tolled 10 as sunlight spilled across the courtyard, gilding the crowd that gathered for the new semester's convocation. At the edge of the dais, Arielle waited, the late summer breeze tugging at her hair. A scar traced one cheek, visible and unashamed, while her hands rested calmly on the wheels of her chair. There was a hush in the crowd, a subtle, reverent energy, as if every seat in the auditorium understood the gravity of this moment. Students and faculty packed the rows, a tapestry of faces both eager and apprehensive, professors in their ceremonial robes, freshmen with restless legs and wide eyes, upperclassmen who had heard Arielle's story on the news but had never imagined sharing a campus with her. She saw Bailey and Marcus standing at the back, pride and anxiety etched into their features. Jade, notebook in hand, recorded everything, a chronicler of rebirth. As Arielle's name was called, the room erupted in applause. She rolled herself forward to the podium, every movement deliberate. For an instant, the years of pain, the courtroom battles, the sleepless nights, rose up before her, threatening to choke her voice. But then she looked out into the sea of faces, saw students who looked like her, who carried private scars of their own, and her resolve crystallized. She took a slow, steady breath, microphone humming beneath her palm. "Thank you," she began, her voice quiet, clear, a blade of sunlight through the haze. "Most of you know who I am. You know what happened to me, what happened to my family, to this city. You might think of me as a victim or a headline or a symbol for someone else's fight, that I want to tell you what I've learned standing in the fire." The audience was silent, spellbound. Arielle continued, "Adversity is a forge. Pain does not make you weak. It makes you sharp. I did not choose to have acid thrown on me. I did not choose to be the one who had to fight or to relive that night in courtrooms, in hospitals, in front of strangers. But I did choose what came after. I chose not to be ashamed. I chose to stand up even when it hurt. I chose to tell the truth. And most of all, I chose to keep moving forward, not just for me, but for every one of you who thinks you can." In the front row, a young woman wiped her eyes. Near the back, a group of black students sat a little taller, their heads lifted. Even a few white students, some who had, years earlier, scoffed at activism or snickered at Arielle's story, found themselves blinking away tears, suddenly ashamed of the cheap jokes and easy judgments of the past. One of them, a young man with close-cropped blonde hair, stood up after a long hesitation. "Arielle," he said, voice thick, "I used to be one of the people who doubted you. I'm sorry. You've made me see what courage really looks like." A ripple of empathy moved through the hall. Arielle smiled. Genuine, unguarded. Apologies matter. Change matters more. What you do from today on, that's your story to write. As the convocation ended, students surged around her. Some reached for handshakes. Others asked for advice. A few simply stood quietly nearby, absorbing her strength by proximity. For once, Arielle did not shrink from their attention. She accepted it with humility, knowing that this moment was not only her healing, but theirs as well. Outside, under the dappled trees, Bailey embraced his daughter, his voice choked with emotion. "You changed more than just the verdict, Arielle. You changed the future." Marcus, standing beside them, grinned. She's our North Star now. Let's make sure she's never alone again." In the days that followed, Ariel's speech became a touchstone on campus. Professors quoted her in lectures, students wrote editorials inspired by her journey, and campus organizations formed new coalitions around issues of access, safety, and justice. Where before there had been resignation or cynicism, now there was energy, a hunger to build something better. But Ariel's rebirth was only the beginning. At home that evening, Bailey sat at his kitchen table surrounded by stacks of letters from activists, lawmakers, and ordinary people from all over the state. He picked up the phone and dialed, his voice steady as he began laying the groundwork for a statewide campaign, a movement not just to punish the guilty, but to ensure the guilty could never rise again. As Ariel took her place as an icon of resilience and hope, Bailey stepped into the larger arena, ready to transform one family's struggle into a campaign that might, at last, change the laws and hearts of an entire state. Bailey Johnson's kitchen became an impromptu war room. Papers and digital tablets spread across every surface, phones ringing with calls from lawmakers, activists, and ordinary people whose hearts had been pried open by the Johnson saga. Ariel, balancing her renewed college coursework and her new life as a reluctant symbol, worked beside her father late into the night, drafting emails, reviewing proposals, and joining live-streamed town halls that drew thousands at a time. Outside, the world shifted on its axis. What started in Briarwood swept outward in ripples, first to neighboring counties, then across state lines, and, before winter's thaw, to the whole country. The phrase "Justice for Ariel" appeared everywhere, from protest banners in Times Square to the side of rural barns in Alabama, painted on murals in Detroit, sung in pulpits in Atlanta, even projected onto courthouse facades in Los Angeles. Social media became a living archive of anger and aspiration. Viral videos showed Ariel's speech played at candlelight vigils in the rain. Elderly men marched arm in arm with teenagers who'd never met the Johnsons but saw in their battle a mirror of their own family's grief and hope. Within months, rallies and marches overtook the nation's city square. In Houston, Cleveland, and Sacramento, Black and brown mothers took the stage, recounting losses and betrayals, demanding to know why police accountability had always been an empty promise. Environmental justice activists linked arms with racial justice organizers, tying Ariel's story to a broader indictment of the corporate and institutional rot that had been left unchecked for generations. The air at these events crackled with anger, but also with a sense of possibility, the knowledge that a tide had shifted and would not easily recede. As Bailey's campaign gained momentum, pressure mounted on elected officials. Local legislators, once content to echo talking points from police unions and industry lobbyists, now found their town halls overtaken by crowds holding photos of Ariel, chanting, "This is what justice looks like." In several state houses, bills were introduced to limit qualified immunity for law enforcement, mandate independent investigations of police violence, and require rigorous oversight for chemical companies operating in or near vulnerable communities. Jade Thomas, her voice now familiar on cable news panels, became a leading chronicler and advocate for the movement. In interviews, she refused to let the story be whittled down to a single moment or a single city. This isn't about vengeance. It's about a living promise. A promise that pain won't be swept aside and that those in power will finally answer to those they harm. Yet as the wave built, so did the resistance. In some states, conservative governors and attorney generals dug in their heels, decrying the mob mentality and vowing to protect their officers and businesses from what they painted as federal overreach. On talk radio and social media, old canards of race-baiting and outside agitators resurfaced, fueling bitter debates that split households and communities. Commentators questioned the true motives behind justice for Ariel, warning of chaos and the loss of tradition. Nightly, cable news played dueling footage, one network showing Ariel addressing a rally with calm conviction, another replaying incendiary clips of protests turning unruly. But these countercurrents, though noisy, could not stem the flood. The mood of the country had shifted. The old language of denial rang hollow in the face of such visible pain and unity. Churches held roundtables, unions passed resolutions, and universities launched research projects into the links between environmental risk and racialized policing. At kitchen tables, in barbershops, at union halls and synagogues, Americans old and young debated and wondered aloud if, perhaps this time would be different. The breaking point arrived as Congress reconvened in the spring, facing a torrent of petitions, polling, and public demonstrations. A bipartisan group of senators and representatives, many of them pressed into action by their own constituents, introduced sweeping legislation. The Ariel Johnson Act would, if passed, rewrite federal guidelines for law enforcement accountability and mandate stricter corporate oversight. In a rare moment of unity, the bill was sent to committee, drawing praise and outrage in equal measure. And in the midst of this historic turmoil, an invitation arrived for Bailey and Ariel, a chance to address Congress directly. Their story, once a private agony, had become a national call to conscience. Bailey, reading the embossed letter, looked to his daughter. "They want to hear from us, Rie. They want you to tell them why this matters." Ariel nodded, her scars radiant in the morning light. "Then we'll speak, not just for us, but for everyone they tried to silence." As they prepared for the journey to the nation's capital, supporters gathered for one last rally outside City Hall. Voices rose in prayer and protest. Candles glowed through the dusk, flickering with the hope that, this time, the wave of change would crash all the way to the doors of power. With the nation's attention fixed on Washington, Bailey and Ariel set out to make their stand, not just as survivors, but as architects of a future where the arc of justice would bend, at last, toward all those left waiting in the shadows. 5 years after the courtroom's thunder and the city's reckoning, a gentle spring morning found Ariel Johnson guiding a group of children through the winding paths of the new Memorial Park, built on the grounds where, decades before, Black voices were hushed by fear and law. Sunlight filtered through budding trees as laughter echoed between monuments engraved with names, some famous, many known only to loved ones, each marking a life shaped by injustice and resistance. The group gathered by a fountain crowned with a bronze sculpture of interlocked hands, black, brown, white, reaching upward together. Ariel, her wheelchair gliding easily along the stone, stopped beneath the sculpture and turned to the circle of children. Their faces were a kaleidoscope of backgrounds, descendants of laborers, activists, refugees, and the city's new hope. She began, "This isn't just a park, it's a promise." Each name here stood up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. They dreamed of a world where courage was contagious, where justice meant something real. Some of them, like me, were scared. But they chose to fight anyway, and that's how change begins. The children leaned in, listening as Ariel shared fragments of her journey, her father's tenacity, the night of the attack, the roar of a nation demanding more. Her voice did not linger on pain, but on the hands that reached out to lift her. Bailey, Marcus, Jade, strangers who became family, and the millions who refused to turn away. Near the back of the group, Bailey watched quietly, a bittersweet pride etched into his face. Marcus snapped photos for the local paper, occasionally wiping away tears. Jade stood with a notepad, still chronicling stories, but now as a witness to legacy, not crisis. A small black boy, maybe 8 or 9, tugged at Ariel's sleeve, his eyes wide. "Were you scared?" he asked, the question fragile as glass. Ariel smiled, her scars shining in the morning light. "Yes, I was scared. But I was more afraid of what would happen if nobody stood up. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about not letting fear decide who you are." The boy nodded. It's clutching his mother's hand, and the group moved on, laughter slowly returning. Ariel wheeled to the heart of the memorial, pausing to look back at the children, some skipping ahead, some silent in thought. The city skyline rose behind them, no longer a fortress but a place of possibility. As the tour ended, families and friends gathered around Ariel, embracing her, their voices weaving together in a tapestry of gratitude and hope. Cameras flashed, not as weapons, but as beacons, capturing the moment for history's unbroken line. Bailey approached, resting his hand on Ariel's shoulder. "You gave them more than a story. You gave them a future." She looked up, her eyes clear. "None of us did it alone, Dad. We did it together. And we'll keep doing it until justice is as common as the sunrise." As the morning light danced over the community gathered in unity, Ariel's words echoed a vow, a legacy, and a call. As long as we stand together, justice will never be impossible. So the fight continued, not with one family, but with every hand joined, every heart awake. For in the story of the Johnsons, America was reminded, the arc of justice bends only if we push, together, every single day. Justice is never the work of one, but of many voices rising against silence. Ariel and her family proved that courage, unity, and relentless truth can turn pain into a legacy of hope. Their fight is not just history, it's a call for all of us to stand together for what's right. How would you respond if justice called on you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's keep this conversation alive. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire change. Together, we can be the difference.